Everyone, Dr. Callanan here. I posted a sample genetic report on the Free Wild Side community, and there was a lot of interest in it, a lot of really great questions as well. So I thought I'd put together a short presentation. We've got 23 slides here today, and we're going to go through a sample report that I received from the GeneRx system that we use at the Wild Side Wellness. Now, we're going to talk about the main highlights that came up on this particular genetic report, but keep in mind, this is a 58-page report. So what we have to do is we have to do a complete intake, look at what your signs and symptoms are, what are your health goals, and relate that to your genetics. Because the really amazing thing is, even though your genes are never going to change, you only have to run your genetics once. The great part is that through epigenetics, we can slow down or speed up genes if we need to, turn off, turn on. And we can do that through diet, lifestyle, and exercise, as well as key supplement recommendations for you based off of your genetics. And every person is individualized. And what I really love about this report is it gives you very specific details on exactly what you need to be consuming in terms of your macronutrients, so the amount of protein, carbs, and fats that are best for you, the types of exercise down to the minute, and the type of exercise that's right for you, as well as some key supplementations. If you're experiencing these symptoms that are associated with these genes, key supplementations can really, really be helpful. We're going to go over the ones that I really like to focus on, which are mood and concentration. So what are the neurochemicals, the neurotransmitters in your brain doing? How are you detoxifying? How are you metabolizing your estrogens? What diet you should be on? What exercise program is best for you? As well as we're going to hone in on one particular gene in particular, which is the FTO gene. And this is so eloquently known as the fatso gene because this really impacts our metabolism and how we store weight by modulating key hormones, leptin, adiponectin, and ghrelin. And we're going to talk about some things that you can do from a diet, lifestyle, and supplementation perspective to help correct for this gene that you may or may not have depending on your unique health situation. So let's just dive in. We'll get started right away, focusing on first mood and concentration. So dopamine is the key hormone that is secreted in our brain. It's a neurotransmitter that is responsible for motivation. So keeping you motivated to do those things that are making you feel good. Now, this is really important to look at. It's more of a Goldilocks hormone. You don't want it too high. You don't want it too low. You want it secreted in the right amount. You want it to bind to the right amount of receptors in your brain, and you want it cleared out at the appropriate rate, because if it's not, that's where we can see some signs and symptoms of being unmotivated, but also on the other hand, being more prone to addictive tendencies. So this client in particular, I'm actually going to lower this so we can see the full report. This client in particular was not only making less dopamine, but she also had fewer dopamine receptors, and her dopamine was being cleared out very quickly. So not only was less being made, less binding to the receptors, but it was completely being taken out or cleared by the body at a faster rate. So with this genetics, this person is actually more at risk for developing those addictive type behaviors, gambling, overtraining with exercise, overeating, over shopping, as well as having an increased desire for those fatty foods, the chips, the cheese, the nuts, the alcohol. And this is because they are seeking that reward, that pleasure center, whether it's from food, sex, or extreme sports. They have greater highs when they feel the high. So they do something that makes them feel good. They really, really feel good. It's amplified to the max, but then it's cleared out really quickly. And then they go to seek it out again. They may also find difficulty holding focus and concentrations for long periods of times because they are always seeking that dopamine rush, and then it's gone rather quickly. So some things that you can do if this is something that you're experiencing and you have this gene is using things like magnesium. So many people are deficient in magnesium. Magnesium is such an important nutrient that we're just not getting enough of. Rhodiola is an adaptogenic herb, so it helps modulate our immune response. Really, really good for helping with motivation. L-tyrosine as well. L-tyrosine is an amino acid that you would get from protein-containing foods or supplementation, and it goes on to making dopamine in the brain. Mucuna also can increase dopamine, and things like L-theanine, green tea. So looking at, can we incorporate lifestyle changes, which just involves drinking a whole bunch of green tea throughout the day to help sustain this dopamine response. In addition, one of the amazing things for helping with sustaining dopamine is exercise. So if you're having those food cravings because your body's wanting that boost of dopamine, one thing that you can do is just a short exercise session to release that dopamine so that the craving is not there. Regular exercise, again, really, really important, as well as modulating stress. So thinking of meditation, stress reduction, gratitude, deep breathing, these are all going to be important for this individual with the altered dopamine production. The next neurotransmitter is serotonin. Serotonin is our happy hormone. This is really, really important in those who are suffering with depression. We want to make sure that we have adequate levels of serotonin. Serotonin is primarily made in the gut, so we also want to look at if genetically you are prone to low serotonin, as well as you have an altered gut microbiome, maybe the first step is to address the altered gut microbiome, providing with probiotics to help get to the root cause of why the serotonin is low. So this individual makes significantly less serotonin in the brain as well as in the intestines. So this person is at increased risk for depression, low moods, waking up at 5 a.m. We see that happening with patients as well with low serotonin levels, as well as because of the relationship of serotonin to the gut. These patients may experience bloating, irregular bowel movements, muscle pain or swelling, again, food cravings, specifically for those sweets and chocolate. One thing that you can do from a supplemental standpoint, if you have this gene and you're also experiencing the symptoms of low mood, is 5-HTP. So 5-HTP is the precursor to serotonin, so it'll help boost serotonin. I really like the one from Designs for Health because it has the cofactors that allow for the 5-HTP to be converted with the serotonin. So that is something in addition to regular exercise and stress reduction that could be considered for this patient. Detoxification. Essentially, detoxification helps to take out hormones that are in our body. It helps to process toxins that are in our body just from daily living, as well as extra toxins that we're experiencing from our environment. There are two phases of detoxification. In the first phase, we're looking at enzymes, particularly cytochrome P450 enzymes that help to take the toxins and convert them to an intermediate metabolite. Now, this intermediate is actually more of a problem. We have to make sure that if phase 1 is upregulated, that we also upregulate phase 2, because you don't want these reactive intermediates sitting around. Oftentimes what we see is we see a fast phase 1 and a slow phase 2. That's going to create a problem because the amount of intermediates that get backed up. And we also need key nutrients, particularly B vitamins, flavones, antioxidants from fruits and vegetables. We need amino acids for phase 2. Amino acids essentially come from protein in our diet, so making sure you're having enough protein to promote liver detoxification. And then after these hormones and xenobiotics or chemicals from our environments go through both phase 1 or phase 2, they're either eliminated in the urine or they're eliminated via the bile, which goes into the intestine and needs to be excreted from the stool. Now, if you're not having at least one adequate bowel movement a day, that's a problem, because essentially these toxins and hormones can be recycled, having to go through the process again. So really, really important to make sure you're having an adequate bowel movement every single day, adequate fiber in your diet, lots of water. If this is an issue for you, we need to look at, okay, is this a motility issue? Is this a food sensitivity issue? Is it a lack of fiber issue? Because we really want to get to the root cause of why you're not having a bowel movement each day and fix it so that you do. Signs and symptoms of impaired detoxification include cholesterol issues, blood sugar dysregulation, weight changes, hormone dysfunction, digestive issues, and immune system dysregulation. So let's look at what the genetic report came up for this individual in terms of phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 was really interesting for this client. Essentially, she produced less cytochrome P450 3A4, but she did have normal production of the CYP1A2 enzymes. So this really slightly balanced out their phase 1 detoxification pathways. There is not one gene, very rarely there is one gene that regulates one specific pathway. We have to look at all the genes in context to see if maybe, one is slow, but the rest are taking care of it, balancing out. That's completely fine. So what we want to know is, what are the signs and symptoms of this patient? So even though one is impaired, but the other one is normal, depending on your signs and symptoms, if you have a toxin overload, this could be a problem, but it could also not be a problem. So this is why it's really important to do a complete intake, see what your lifestyle is like, what supplements are you currently on, what is your diet like, what is your mood like, how's your stress, what are you doing for exercise, to determine if these genes have an implication based off of your unique situation now. Now, the one thing is with this patient, she has that normal CYP1A2, which yes, it's balancing the P450, but the problem is when you have that normal CYP1A2, you're actually more likely to develop the inflammatory substances. So what we want to do is we want to slow down the CYP1A2 just a little bit with things like caffeine or turmeric to help modulate this inflammatory reaction that's occurring. Now, this is really great news because she loves coffee. So for some individuals, coffee can be really beneficial because of how it acts on the CYP1A2 enzyme in the liver. So we're recommending 2 to 3 cups of coffee per day. This patient, we didn't include it in this presentation, but she isn't lactose intolerant. So she can consume lactose if she feels like it is tolerable for her. But that's another thing that the genes can look at. Are you lactose intolerant or not? Some people, even though they're not lactose intolerant, can be sensitive to the proteins, the whey or casein that's in dairy. So something to look into in particular as well. Interestingly enough, this person really needs to cook their cruciferous vegetables. If we go back to phase 2, all this sulfuronation, glucuronation that's occurring, this glutathione production in phase 2, this really requires sulfur-based vegetables. So those cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, bok choy, Brussels sprouts. But for this individual, because of her genetics, it's best to cook them. So cruciferous vegetables are very important, but anything raw cruciferous vegetables or peppermint or echinacea, it can impair or speed up the CYP1A2, which we don't want. In addition, juicing raw vegetables for this individual is inflammatory for them. So even something that is very healthy may not be healthy for you, your unique genetic makeup. So for this patient, caffeine, turmeric help lowering that inflammatory response, as well as making sure to cook their vegetables. That's going to be really important. In addition, remember, she has the impaired CYP3A4. And in addition, this 3YP3A4 is inhibited by things like antibiotics, as well as prednisone. Even the antimicrobial herb golden seal can do that as well, and grapefruit. So we want to look at, okay, is this patient on antibiotics long-term? Is there prednisone long-term? These wouldn't be ideal for this patient. We need to find alternatives. So the treatment that we are recommending, cruciferous vegetables, only cooked, curcumin, a really big anti-inflammatory substance that comes from turmeric, as well as looking at coffee, which is going to be really exciting for her. Phase 2. So this client had slightly lower phase 2 detoxification pathways, and phase 2 is what takes that reactive intermediate, carcinogens, and medications and helps to eliminate them. In addition, she has a slower SOD2. So SOD2, if you have a slower one, you're more at risk of mitochondrial dysfunction, low energy occurs with mitochondrial dysfunction, as well as oxidative damage. So if you are having oxidative damage in your cells, you are more at risk of developing cellular damages and leading to things like pre-carcinogens in your body. So what we might want to recommend for this patient is helping to support phase 2. You can support phase 2 with glutathione, our master antioxidant, or the precursor to glutathione, which is N-acetylcysteine. Really, really important. Keep those cruciferous vegetables in the diet, but make sure she cooks them first. Estrogen metabolism. Estrogen metabolism is really, really important. We have healthy metabolites of estrogen as well as unhealthy types. Our main estrogen, estradiol, is broken down into 4-OH estrogen. That is the one that we do not want because it damages DNA by forming quinone adducts. 2-OH estrogen, that's our protective one. Estrogen is good. It protects our bones. It protects us from cardiovascular disease. So we want a healthy level of 2-OH, but we don't want a higher level of 4-OH. In addition, we don't want a higher level of 16-OH. 16-OH promotes tissue growth. So if you have an estrogen-dependent cancer and you have elevated levels of 16-OH, you're more likely to have those estrogen-dependent cells growing. In addition, other estrogen-dependent cells are typically for women in the lower half. So if you have an elevated 16-OH, you are more likely to stimulate the estrogen in your lower half and have increased fat deposits in the hips, bum, and thighs. So what did it say for this particular patient? So this particular patient right here has a poor conversion of our main estrogen, estradiol, to the 2-OH protective form. This is what we really want to optimize. Another way to, even if your genetics say that, if you want to know exactly where you are today, doing a urine hormone test, the Dutch test, will show you exactly what your 4-OH, 2-OH, and 16-OH levels are today. One really amazing thing that we can do to help lower this 4-OH, the pre-cancer or the increased risk of cancer estrogen, is to do things like broccoli seeds, Cruciferous vegetables, again, they should be cooked for this person, or looking at a supplement such as Broccoli Protect, which contains a high level of broccoli seeds, particularly sulforaphane, to help promote more of the healthy estrogen pathways versus the unhealthy estrogen pathways. Cruciferous vegetables, amazing. You could also do DIM. DIM is a supplement that you can take to improve the ratio of 4-OH, 2-OH, and 16-OH. And in addition, based off of this patient's genetics, she's more at risk for things like fibroids, because if you have elevated levels of 16-OH, you're more likely to promote tissue growth, as well as breast, prostate, and colon cancer. So this person in particular would not be a good candidate for estrogen replacement therapy because she has a poor conversion of estrogen to the protective 2-OH estrogen. In addition, if this client was using a form of birth control that contains estrogen, that would also be similar to using the estrogen replacement therapy. This client, I would recommend avoiding estrogen replacement therapy at all costs, as well as testing what the metabolites are currently using, the urine test, the Dutch test, which we talked about. And with that result, if we are seeing that, yes, the 4-OH, 16-OH is elevated, using things like Broccoli Protect, cruciferous vegetables that are cooked, and DIM as a supplement. Exercise. Okay, so this is really interesting for this patient. This patient in particular has a gene that doesn't allow adequate blood flow to the muscles, as well as impairments with the sodium potassium pump. So what the heck does that mean? That essentially means that HIIT training in particular is not the best for this patient. She will do better with endurance training, medium size weights, higher reps, the 14 rep range, as well as doing lighter weights for a longer duration, as well as exercise that requires multiple muscle groups. Really, really interesting here. Recommendations for resistant traits. Again, so this client is designed for medium weights, medium repetition. Because of that less angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, they have a decreased ability to flush out the blood from the muscles. You could also notice heavy levels of lactic acid buildup. So, you're lifting heavy weights, you really get the lactic acid, your muscles are sore from a prolonged period of time. That's because of the impairment with the sodium potassium pump. This patient may want to supplement with about 100 milligrams of magnesium, as well, not magnesium, potassium, to support these pumps, especially on the days where they are exercising. Take breaks, 30-second breaks, medium weights, engage more muscle groups, and aim for exercises 2 to 3 times a week would be most ideal for this patient. Diet. So for this client's diet, she does have normal adiponectin, leptin, and ghrelin levels. We're going to talk about the FTO gene, which clients who have a modification in their FTO gene do not have normal adiponectin, leptin, and ghrelin hormones, which promotes obesity. This client in particular does. So she has normal hormone levels, which promotes a more robust and faster metabolism. However, remember, there are multiple genes that code for the same thing. However, this client has slightly lower thermogenic rate, burning fat for fuel. And if you have a slightly lower thermogenic rate, you are at risk of gaining weight, particularly when you're consuming saturated fats and refined carbohydrates. So for this client, what I would recommend is 3 meals a day, limit the snacking. The more you snack, the more you're going to increase insulin, and the more you're going to be at risk of insulin resistance. And insulin is an anabolic hormone, meaning that it builds things. So the less you can snack, have 2 to 3 square meals throughout the day, have your coffee, have your water. And for this client in particular, because she is not lactose intolerant and she tolerates dairy quite well, you can have a small amount of milk or milk alternative in your coffee. Ideally, you have your coffee black. Try not to consume any calories between your meals to help boost that thermogenic rate. In addition, lower the amount of refined carbohydrates, lower the amount of saturated fats. So saturated fats are coming from things like red meats and coconut oil. This is not a recommendation for everyone. This is a recommendation based off of these genetics. Protein. Protein is really, really important, but not everyone requires the same amount of protein. This client in particular requires the lowest amount of protein of all the genetic codings. Specifically, we're looking at 0.8 to 0.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Divide that by 3 meals a day that we had recommended for this patient. So an example, 160 pound individual, You divide that by 2.2 or just convert it on Google, that's about 75 kilograms. And then when we divide that, we're looking at approximately 18 grams of protein per meal. That is approximately 3 to 4 ounces of protein per meal. It's not a really high amount. Now, if this individual was really passionate about exercises, really wanted to do more resistance training, we might up that a bit. So that's why the intake is really important. Again, this client produces normal amounts of adiponectin, leptin, ghrelin, so that's controlling your hunger and satiety hormones. But she does not use fatty acids readily as a fuel source. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are doing some fasting to promote the body to use fatty acids for fuel source, as well as looking at lowering the amount of saturated fats. This client is not very sensitive to carbohydrates, so she can consume carbohydrates. It helps to balance their blood sugar and maintain the weight. Now, in addition, some people will produce a lot of inflammation when they consume carbohydrates. This is not the case for this client, but keep in mind it might not be the same for you. We do want to lower the amount of refined carbohydrates, of course, and also keep grains and starches and fruit and alcohol to a maximum 3 servings per day. And when we are looking at this client's genetic profile, their carbohydrate amount should be 2/3 the size of the amount of protein that they have. Ideally, when we're looking at carbohydrates, the best sources of carbohydrates are going to be your root vegetables as well as other vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower. They can consume definitely an abundance of those while keeping the grains and the starches at a lower level. These are the specific carbohydrates to consume in moderation. Again, higher refined things, grains, breads, pasta, rice. We want to keep those to a minimum. Starches are okay for this client. Fruits are okay, but we want to make sure that we are not over consuming it, keeping it to about 2/3 the amount of protein. And what we do when we review this client's genetic report, when we do the follow-up consultation, we will present an ideal meal plan for them, whether it's based off of plate size, portion size, or macro counting, or just a general rough idea. We will go into more specifics of what your diet specifically should look like every day. Fats. This client, because of the slightly lower thermogenic rate, the inability to use fat as a fuel source as efficiently, we want to lower particularly the saturated fats. So using things like almonds and walnuts over other nuts, eliminating the amount of coconut oil we have in our diet, limiting or removing totally vegetable oils and canola oils, and more often choosing things like poultry, chicken, turkey, and fish over red meat. There is research that shows those with this genetic profile have an increased BMI when consuming saturated fats higher than 22 grams per day. That level will, of course, vary on the individual size. But one thing you can do is just type it into MyFitnessPal to see where you're at on a regular basis, making sure that you're not over that 22 gram per day serving. Now, this is the last topic that I want to talk to you. I know we ran through this really quickly, but I wanted to give you just a brief overview about what you could expect if you took your 23andMe data and ran it through our software. This is a gene, the FTO gene, so eloquently called the fatso gene. This is not a gene that this client has. She's actually normal for this gene, but this is one that has tons of research on it and clinical implications that are extensive in terms of weight management, prediabetes, insulin resistance as well. So this was one of the first metabolic genes identified in clinical research, and approximately 40% of Caucasians, 5% of Africans, and 21% of Asians carry this risk allele. And the risk allele is A. If you are TT on your genetics, you are normal, like this client was. If you are AA, you're homozygous, meaning you're at more of a risk, versus AT, heterozygous. And we do review this in more detail when we walk you through it so you understand exactly what this means. I'm just trying to go through this fast today. If you have the A variant, you are more at risk of developing a BMI, which increases your risk of obesity, independent of diet and exercise. So these people, regardless of the diet or exercise, are more likely to have an elevated body mass index. However, the effects of the FTO gene are significantly more if the individual is consuming a low protein, high saturated fat diet or a high caloric diet. So even if you have this risk allele, the A allele, you can significantly improve your weight management ability by focusing on protein, and lowering the amount of saturated fats in your diet. These clients particularly do amazing on the Metabolic Reset program. Our Metabolic Reset program is anti-inflammatory. It promotes protein, it promotes fiber, it promotes stress reduction, cortisol management, it balances your hormone, it improves detoxification. These individuals see fantastic results. They're more at the 30 to 40 pound decrease in the 6-week period. At a minimum, anyone who goes through the Metabolic Reset will lose 20 pounds in 6 weeks, but these are the rock stars that once we just remove the barrier, influence this gene, they see phenomenal results. So if you have the FTO-A variant, what can you do? We're going to get back to what we can do because I forgot about this slide. This shows why the FTO gene increases your risk of obesity. And it increases your risk of obesity because it alters the 3 main metabolic hormones. Ghrelin is the first one. That is the hormone that regulates our hunger. If you have altered ghrelin production, you're going to be more likely to experience food cravings, and specifically those dense caloric foods, high fat, high sugar foods. Adiponectin, this is the hormone that increases insulin sensitivity as well as fatty acid oxidation. So this means that if you have an altered adiponectin hormone, you're not going to be able to tolerate carbohydrates as well because of the less insulin sensitivity. In addition, you're not going to be able to oxidize those fats for fuel. So remove fatty acids from your fat stores, utilize them for energy sources. So we really want to help modulate these hormones when we are looking at obesity. The last hormone that this A allele affects is leptin. This is the hormone that reduces hunger and reduces our food-seeking behavior. We want to make sure that ghrelin, adiponectin, and leptin are in really healthy ranges so that you can lose weight in an effortless way and you don't feel like you're fighting superhuman willpower that it often feels like for these people. So what do you do if you have this variant allele? You want to target, of course, the hormones that are affected, ghrelin, adiponectin, and leptin. And the way we can do this is to do things like intermittent fasting. Again, that high protein, high fiber, low saturated fats, low refined carbohydrates diets. Doing things like sauna, infrared saunas are great. Doing exercise based off of your genetics. If you are at the point where you have more inflammation, more stress hormone, doing exercise will not help get worse. So we really need to figure out where you are, what do your genetics say? And in the Metabolic Reset, I recommend, because most of my clients are overworked, they're burnt out, they're doing a lot, they're go, 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 they're high achieving, they're wanting to do it all and push the limits. Oftentimes, I know just from talking to them, because they were just like me when I was suffering from my own metabolic and hormone changes, exercise for them is not going to be appropriate at that time. So we remove exercise, we optimize digestion, we optimize detoxification, we optimize these hormones so that they can lose 20 to 40 pounds in a 6-week period. Then we can put the exercise back in. There's also research showing that artificial sweeteners are not all that they're cracked out to be. They actually do raise insulin levels, promoting weight gain. So eliminate artificial sweeteners, sucralose, sweet and low, all of those ones. We definitely want to eliminate 100%. If you're using stevia or xylitol, those natural sweeteners, 0-calorie sweeteners, limit them because they still will raise insulin levels. Limit them as much as possible. Next thing you can do is synchronize your circadian rhythm. What does that mean? That means going to bed by 10 p.m., wearing sleep blue blocking glasses, making sure that you're not exposed to that bright blue light before bed because that will impair your body's natural ability to make melatonin. I always put my blue light blocking glasses on around 7 o'clock because I am utilizing electronics at night. Best thing to do is to have your salt lamp, dim lights, don't be on electronics. For me, sometimes with work, it's not all possible, so I throw on the blue light blocking glasses. I do have apps on my phone and my computer to dim the screens. That helps as well. You also want to check your vitamin D levels. Those with higher vitamin D levels with this FTO genetic variant are less likely to have increased weight gain than those with lower vitamin D. So having adequate levels of vitamin D appears to be effective or protective, to those with the FTO genetic variation. Now, does this mean to go out and high dose yourself with vitamin D? Absolutely not. You need to check your blood levels to determine what your vitamin D levels are. it's really important to do so because there is a sweet spot for vitamin D, and you can overdo it because it is a fat soluble hormone. So check your blood, know what your levels are, and supplement appropriately. There also is research that shows possible epigenetic effects with dairy. So this means modulating the genetic expression. Epigenetics is just, are your genes turned on or are they turned off, dependent on your environment. So there was some research that showed that milk consumption may increase the FTO, driving obesity, diabetes, etc. So limit dairy as much as possible, as well as there are another number of issues with dairy, whether it's food sensitivity, whether it's antibiotics, whether it's hormones, that we also want to consider when we're consuming dairy. For most of my clients, I say completely eliminate dairy in addition to gluten. So that's my go-to. Goat's cheese, sheep cheese is going to be better, as well as buffalo mozzarella would be better. Of course, organic when at all possible and feasible, but limit dairy as much as possible. So that is it. That is all I want to chat with you guys. I hope that was helpful, a little bit of an overview of this genetic report. It is very much in depth. It can be confusing. That's why when we do your genetic reports, we do a complete initial consultation as well as a follow-up to make sure that you understand what these means, you have an action plan in terms of diet, exercise, and supplementation to get you feeling your optimal, get you feeling your best. And then we follow up after we've made those modifications to make sure that you are on the right track and you are seeing the results that you are wanting to. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. So much for showing interest and commenting. I love to see your questions. Any questions that you have, please post them. I am happy to answer them. Have an amazing weekend and we'll talk soon.